We live in a time where Silent Hill has more Western games than the original Japanese ones. A time where there are 3 movies, of which the first one accidentally turned out almost okay, I guess, but the latter 2 being some of the worst pieces of media ever to be committed to the big screen. We're talking so bad that they make Twilight seem like a significant motion picture achievement.
You sure?
Yes.
On top of that, we have a remake of one of the best video games of all time, which even holds up today by all standards, but because reasons, it just had to go for an aesthetic surgery and get botched. So, as the remake trend slowly but surely crept into every pore of the video game industry, we slowly forgot that there was a time where developers actually made genuine art. Now don't get me wrong, not all remakes are bad, but they usually do come with the loss of the soul, the very essence that made these games what they were, and unfortunately Silent Hill 2 is no exception. Among all these, let's call them lesser products, it's easy to forget that the Silent Hill franchise was once pure art and quality, sitting on the throne as an unconquered king of psychological horror. It was a passion project born of desire to both entertain and unsettle, and this is why I want to do something different today. I want to go back and speak of Silent Hill from the perspective when I first played it. A lot of newer generation are met with a whole palette of these games today, but I want to take you back to the time when even the second game wasn't announced yet. Only the original Silent Hill existed. It's 1999, I'm 10 years old and I'm about to seriously traumatize myself with a piece of media unlike anything I've ever seen at that point. And spoiler alert, it was totally worth it. People spoke of this new horror game that transcends the standard Resident Evil formula and brings to life something far more sinister and disturbing. While at this point I was already introduced to horror through movies, this was an experience unlike any other. There were no formulaic jump scares and breathers, just constant everlasting tension and dread from the beginning to the end. The word fear adopted a new meaning. Another huge factor in the whole experience was that I didn't know what to expect. I was new, both the gaming and the genre itself. I didn't know what awaited me, and it was terrifying. I also didn't know what the formula was for this type of game, and back then if you got stuck, you were properly stuck. There was no internet to help you, you couldn't Google answers, and the only way to figure stuff out was either through months of sheer persistence, if someone told you, or if there was a walkthrough in a gaming magazine. Luckily for me, there was. There was this magazine called PSX in Croatia, which stood for PlayStation Experience. The first issue actually came out some months before the release of Silent Hill, so naturally with all the craze about the game, PSX very soon made a walkthrough, which was very convenient for a 10-year-old me as it was way too stressful to check absolutely every room and spend more time than needed in any location. I used to play the game only in daylight and no more than an hour or two in continuity because I needed to reset my nervous system. Good times. But one thing I did know for sure was that this was something magical, beyond words. This was something special and I was hooked instantly. I fell in love with every facet of the game, from the world building to the cinematic camera angles and the way the game played. This was not just a game, it was an experience that would leave a mark. For the next year, I made multiple playthroughs of the game and really got a hold of the system and narrative, fully submerging myself into the Silent Hill world. And just as I thought I've seen everything, it happened. One day I ritualistically bought the new issue of PSX and it was right there, staring me in the face. Silent Hill 2 was announced. My initial reaction was, oh no, why did they have to do this? I wasn't pleased. Silent Hill was an absolute masterpiece. It was a standalone monument to quality, mysterious enough to enter the history as an obscure relic, but still a cult classic that was impossible to replicate. It was the Apocalypse Now of gaming. It needed no sequels or spin-offs. It was a perfectly rounded story arc about a man who found himself in a really shitty situation, to say the least. I didn't want to know more about the town. I didn't want to dive deeper into the lore, because the undefined and the obscure was what made it so terrifying and magical. And in the end, how could anyone top this game? I mean, come on, everything that would come after would surely be worse, right? Wrong. What Team Silent had prepared for us would knock every other piece of horror media into oblivion. The date arrived and the product we got was not a sequel, but a standalone game in the same universe, which I believe was an insanely good decision on the developer's part, as it gave us a fresh experience with a different theme that actually doubled down on the disturbing factor. From the get-go, the game felt different from its predecessor. It somehow felt more bleak and serious, not because of its super advanced graphics for the time or anything, but rather in its core. Just when I thought I developed a thick skin by replaying the first game multiple times, Silent Hill 2 brought a whole new level of discomfort into equation. Something just awfully wasn't right. The game's theme was perfectly reflected in its design, and you could feel it from the very first step. While I won't get too much into the lore in this video, you can check out my recap videos for that, this still brings us to spoiler territory, so be advised. You see, Silent Hill 1 was a fantasy game with a psychological factor, while Silent Hill 2 was a psychological game with a fantasy factor. What I mean by this? In Silent Hill 1, the actual plot is about a cult trying to revive their god, but as their plans go downhill, the protagonist gets caught in the middle because of a baby he chose to adopt years earlier, making him privy to the horrors that absolutely had nothing to do with him before he got stranded. In Silent Hill 2, the protagonist ends up in the town by his own merit. He's called there and pulled in. He's not only privy to the horrors of others, he is the horror. The forefront of the plot is living with extreme life-altering decisions and not being able to heal, while the town serves more as a vessel to bring out the inner turmoil and lay the path to resolution. The town wasn't someone else's projection anymore, it was James's. The monsters took the form of his struggles, and these very facts make the second game immediately more frightening. Because let's face it, there's a very slim chance that Baphomet will materialize from someone's subconscious, but being sexually assaulted by your family members or thinking about mercy ending your real spouse is an abhorrent reality for some people. While this in no way invalidates the absolute horror of Dahlia sacrificing her own daughter in the first game, it is unquestionable there's a clear difference between the installments. The developers made a deliberate decision to step out of the cult storyline and focus more on regular people with real issues, and this was the crucial step to making a worthy successor to the best horror game created up to that point, as it stepped in the territory that felt way too real. The next big thing that would set the game apart from the first one and definitely make it more eerie is the demeanor of our protagonist, James. You see, we didn't know much about Harry from the first game, but he seemed polite and caring. What we did know, however, is that he was a father hell-bent on finding his daughter. This alone put him in a more aggressive and action-ridden state. This alone turned him into a hero before we even knew the ending. James, on the other hand, was different. He was unlikable, sometimes unpredictable, and almost felt dead inside. While it is a fact that he was also searching for someone near and dear to him, that being his wife, from the get-go she was already deceased, and James wasn't even sure what he was doing there. Things were not straightforward anymore like in the first game. All these factors made the player distrust the character they were playing as, which cranked the feeling of dread to 11. It was now confusing as opposed to just lock and load and go find your daughter. Also, not a single character you met in Silent Hill 2 was normal. In the first game, Harry at least had Sybil, who was a welcome sight and sort of served as a grounding pillar. She was stuck in Silent Hill just like Harry and shared his concern, but in Silent Hill 2, the characters were there just like James, either by their own merit or they were an extension of his psyche, and from the very first second James encountered them, it was obvious something was terribly wrong. The game took heavy inspiration from David Lynch movies like The Lost Highway and Blue Velvet, making the interactions purposely awkward and dreamlike, so even the cutscenes and conversations felt completely off and unsettling. The Otherworld also wasn't this colorful rusted palette anymore. It didn't feel like hell devoured the world around James. It was much less about the look itself and more about James sinking into the deepest corners of his own deranged psyche. It felt colder and more sinister. You could somehow feel it was tied to the protagonist rather than being a symptom of a third-party influence. The game became heavier and heavier as the player progressed, blurring the line between the Otherworld and the so-called normal realm. I still remember the moment I made it to the labyrinth for the first time. I seriously needed a break. I was completely fried. It felt like sinking deeper and deeper into the nightmare you cannot wake up from. And that brings me to the greatest strength of this game: level and sound design. While the story and subject are supreme, it all falls short unless it's properly directed and conveyed through the medium, and as I already said, Silent Hill 2 reflected it perfectly. Akira Yamaoka understood the importance of silence and how weak a person can feel in the same. This silence laid a perfect foundation for other sounds to have an immense impact, creating a sonic torment in a perfect cohesion with the space around the protagonist, which felt almost liminal. I was trying to figure out for some time why the locations in the original Silent Hill 2 were so unsettling. Why do they feel so much more frightening than in any other horror game including the remake? And it basically comes down to a couple of things. Now, liminal space is all the rage today, but for those unfamiliar with the buzzword, it refers to a place in between, or sort of a state of transition. It's both physical and psychological. The physical liminal space is usually characterized by emptiness, repetitiveness, and simplicity, which together give an eerie feeling of suspended time, kind of a purgatory vibe. First and foremost, I believe Silent Hill 2 really pushed this liminal feeling physically through the very narrow and empty hallways. Perfect examples being Woodside and Blue Creek apartments, and especially the labyrinth. The world building was a perfect extension of the actual psychological liminal space James was in, because what James actually had was trauma-induced dissociative amnesia. James blocked out critical personal information due to a traumatic and, in his case, guilt-inducing event, and the whole game is basically his memory retrieval journey. Hence the constant falls down the rabbit hole, the key points of no return, the literal neural network that is the halls of the labyrinth, deepest depths of his mind before the recall. Silent Hill 2 seamlessly melded the physical and the psychological into a cohesive terror that extends far beyond some standard level design. That is exactly why this game resembles a bad dream so much. The second thing would be the textures and overall visuals. While the graphics and animations were super impressive for that time period, the game didn't turn out flashy. It turned out repugnant beyond measure, which was crucial for encapsulating the horror inside the characters' minds. Team Silent had created a literal playable nightmare, and as the game progressed, this was more so apparent. It was horrific. By the time the player reached the prison area, the textures looked like a bad memory of a worst dream you ever had. The grain also added a layer of filth which perfectly glued everything together, making even the mundane frightening. Every aspect of this game worked together to make you feel as bad as it can. Nothing was cool and nothing was hyped. It was just an everlasting feeling of dread from start to the finish. And that brings me to my final point, which are the endings. Silent Hill 1 had a canon ending, called The Good Ending, in which Harry would defeat the deity and reclaim a reborn version of his daughter. He becomes the hero by powering through the horrors and reclaiming the Father of the Year award. Roll credits, the player can relax. Sort of. But Silent Hill 2, however, did something completely different. There was no saving the day. There was no good or bad ending. There were 4 endings specifically called Leave, In Water, Maria, and Rebirth, and one was more disturbing than the other, as they reflected the impossibility of coping with colossal life hardships. You may ask now, well, what about Leave? That's the quote-unquote good ending, right? James comes to terms with what he had done and leaves the town with Laura. Well, maybe James comes to terms, and heavy emphasis on maybe, but does the player come to terms? And hear me out on this one. I believe the deepest horror of Silent Hill 2 lies in the fact that it actually has no true ending. You see, this game poses some of the hardest questions in existence and lives in the gray zone of the answers. The questions being, can you judge someone? Can you judge James? Can you truly judge Angela after what she has been through? What would you have done in their shoes? If you did it, could you justify it? Could you actually come to terms with it? While the Live ending poses as the so-called good one, the player is left tormented with those questions more so than in any other. The In Water ending shows James ending his own life, as he cannot cope with the realization of what he had done, which is absolutely understandable, and some may say that this ending fits best. The Maria ending shows us James doomed to repeat the cycle until he comes to terms with what he had done, which is also understandable, as coming to terms with what he had done is almost impossible. The Rebirth ending serves the fantasy narrative, deepening the lore a bit, but is also understandable as James cannot accept the death of his wife, so he tries to revive her. But the Leave ending is where the game truly gets you. As you watch James walk out and Mary's letter is read in full, the melancholy hits the hardest. You tend to believe he granted Mary mercy by ending her life, but did he truly do it just for her or because of certain selfish reasons? Sure, Mary wanted the suffering to end, but mind you, this was not turning off life support. James smothered her with a pillow, a vile act that requires time and effort. It's death by asphyxiation. Can we truly call it a mercy kill? On a further note, the questions the player is left with in every ending are, was Angela's murder of her brother and father justifiable? Would she be able to live with it if the torment of abuse didn't get to her first? Would you be able to in her shoes? Would you even do it in the first place? How exactly does one move on from the years of sexual abuse at a very early age? We don't have the answers to these questions because there are no answers. It's way too individual and way too horrific. And this is exactly what makes Silent Hill the most terrifying of them all. Real-life hardship that pushes a person over the edge. This game managed to be a visual representation of a psychological hell. And while Silent Hill 2 did top its predecessor, nothing topped Silent Hill 2 since. I honestly believe it is the best and most terrifying horror game ever created. Later on, Silent Hill 3 did what I was afraid the second game would do, which is become an actual sequel to the first game and make the whole thing out of Cheryl, that is, Heather. But certain things should have stayed buried beneath the Gillespie household. And while I truly love Silent Hill 3 and hold it in the highest of regards, I do have some minor beefs with it, but that's a theme for another video. I also want to take a minute to say that my recap videos were very good to me and brought me my first 1000 subscribers. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive and I can't thank you enough for tuning in and engaging with the content. Also, a lot of you asked for the recap of the Fallout 2 game and I promise I will get to it. However, as the recaps take painstakingly long to make and I'm very time limited at this moment, I will be doing more of the quick retrospective videos like this one, where I will work in the feeling and nostalgia angle rather than just facts about the game. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!